Hello, class, and welcome to This Week in Forensic Psychology. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I am your instructor for this course. Before we dive into this week, I want to give you a little bit of a question. What role do you believe psychology plays in the whole realm of law and justice? Is it merely about understanding the minds of criminals? Or does it extend beyond that to, say, inform the whole legal process in some of the interventions? I just want you to think about that. And think about how we can navigate some of the realms of forensic psychology, because psychology does really play into pretty much every aspect of law and justice. And so forensic psychology has a role to play in all of these areas, and we learn more about that all the time. Now, as always, I want to start off with a little story, but before I do, I'm going to just tell you a little bit of what we're going to be covering in today's lecture. We're going to start off, of course, with the story. And then we'll get into some of the historical foundations, the roots of forensic psychology, and we'll trace some of the origins of the pioneering work of some of the early scholars that really kind of sparked the evolution of this very distinct discipline. Then we'll explore a little bit of the intersection of psychology and the legal system, and look at some landmark cases as well as some legal precedents and the role of psychological expertise in shaping legal proceedings. We'll then go into investigating the development of assessment tools and intervention strategies, and we'll analyze their impact on the whole discipline of forensic practice and their efficacy in understanding and addressing criminal behavior. And finally, we'll explore some of the social and ethical considerations around, and of course, cultural practices and cultural factors that mediate the field of and permeate the field of forensic psychology, and emphasize how it's really important to practice responsible, ethical psychology in order to promote social justice. So that's what we'll dive into today. So let's get to our story. And today I want to introduce you to a really important figure in forensic psychology, Hugo Münsterberg. He's a seminal figure in the development of forensic psychology. He was born in 1863 in Germany. And Münsterberg was a pioneering psychologist who really kind of laid the foundation for the application of psychological principles within the legal system. He entered the University of Leipzig, which is in Germany, in 1883, where he heard lectures by a fellow by the name of Wilhelm Wundt. Now, I'm sure if you've studied any psychology, you've heard of Wundt. Wundt was the one that started the first scientific psychological laboratory. And Münsterberg eventually became Wundt's research assistant and ended up receiving a PhD in physiological psychology in 1885 under Wundt's supervision. And he was only 22 years old at this point. So that gives you a hint at how accomplished this man was going to be. In 1887, Münsterberg received then a medical degree from the University of Heidelberg. And he also wrote a third thesis there and met the university's criteria for becoming a lecturer. Now, while at Freiburg, he started a psychology laboratory and began publishing papers on a number of topics, including attention processes, memory learning, perception, which were all fields that Wundt was very much interested in as well. And that same year, he did marry somebody, a lady by the name of Selma, who was a bit of a distant cousin, which is a little bit of a thing that happened at that time in Germany. In 1889, he was promoted to assistant professor and went on to attend the first International Congress of Psychology, where he met William James. William James was the founding president of the discipline in America. And they kept in contact, and James even invited him to Harvard for a 3-year term as the chair of the psychology lab. And he did that even though Munsterberg didn't really speak any English. But he did learn English rather quickly, and his classes became very popular with students. Now, Munsterberg's legacy is deeply intertwined with his really groundbreaking research into perception and memory and decision making, and because he had a seminal work that was called On the Witness Stand that he published in 1908. And in that, he explored the role of psychology in understanding witness testimony and evaluating the reliability of eyewitness accounts, which was a topic that still remains pretty central to forensic psychology today, because we kind of come to learn that eyewitnesses aren't necessarily the most reliable witnesses. Now, beyond his academic endeavors, Munsterberg was instrumental in advocating for the integration of psychology into the legal system, and he really championed the use of psychological expertise in courtroom proceedings because he argued for the importance of understanding human behavior in the administration of justice. He argued, in essence, how can you bring justice to people if you don't understand people? So first, he argued, start with understanding what is normal in people, and then you can bring justice. But it's difficult to bring justice when you are evaluating somebody against some kind of unrealistic ideal that nobody really holds up to. So, that's Hugo Munsterberg, one of the founding people in forensic psychology. So, we'll go through and talk about some other important people in the history of forensic psychology. Another influential figure during this time was William Marston, whose research on what we call the systolic blood pressure laid the foundation for our modern polygraph exam. What he noticed was blood pressure changes when you are telling the truth or lying. And Marston's work really exemplified the early efforts to develop an objective method for detecting deception, a theme that really continues to be central to forensic psychology today. Additionally, the work of Alfred Binet, and I'm sure if you've taken any other psychology classes, you've heard of Alfred Binet as well, known for his development of the first intelligence test. He also did some work in the emerging field of forensic psychology, and Binet's work on individual differences and cognitive assessments really has provided a valuable insight into the understanding of human behavior, which later began to inform psychological evaluations within the legal settings. So, for example, one of the standard IQ tests is something that's called the Stanford-Binet. And so it's something that you'll use if you are a cognitive forensic psychologist all the time. Another really important figure, and this is somebody that we're going to come back to again in this class, is a fellow by the name of Cesare Lombroso. Cesare Lombroso was an Italian physician and a bit of an amateur criminologist, and really was renowned for his groundbreaking work in the late 19th century. Lombroso really challenged the prevailing belief about crime by promoting a really radical theory, and that is that criminal behavior was not the product of individual choice or social factors, but was, in part, determined by biological factors. And he argued that criminals could be identified by physical traits and anomalies, which he believed were indicative of innate criminal types. He had a theory, Lombroso did, that some people are born criminals. And this sparked considerable controversy, but it also paved the way for the field of criminal anthropology. He did a lot of really meticulous studies on criminals and their physical characteristics, and led to the development of a new approach to understanding crime, one that emphasized the importance of biological factors in shaping behavior. Now, true, a lot of Lombroso's ideas have been heavily criticized and a lot of it has been discredited, but the core idea that there is biological underpinnings to a lot of criminal behavior has been shown to be true. So he was true and he was false. But his groundbreaking work was really in proposing something new, that it wasn't just moral choice. It was something deeper than that impacted crime. Then there's Henry Maudsley, who was a British psychiatrist and really a bit of a contemporary to Lombroso, who also made some significant contributions to the understanding of mental illness and its relationship to criminal behavior. Now, Maudsley didn't agree with Lombroso's biological determinism, but he did emphasize the role of mental illness and social factors in shaping criminal conduct. So Maudsley's work focused on the treatment and rehabilitation of offenders, and really advocated for a more humane and compassionate approach to criminal justice. His argument was, we don't want to just punish people when they go to prison. We want to reform them. Otherwise, they're going to come out being worse criminals. And so we emphasize the importance of addressing underlying psychological and social factors that do contribute to criminal behavior, rather than simply punishing the offender. Now, Maudsley's insights into this whole complex interplay between mental health and criminality, while not perfect, again, did lay some groundwork in the field of forensic psychiatry. And overall, this period laid the foundation for the development of forensic psychology as we know it today. A lot of things have been discarded, other things have been picked up, but these people laid foundations by proposing some significant ideas that play a role today. Now, I want to start with a landmark case from the 1920s that showcases the use of psychological expertise in trials. It's a very infamous case known as Leopold and Loeb that unfolded in the 1920s. Now, a couple of people, Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, were both wealthy and intellectually gifted young men from Chicago. They went on to abduct and murder a 14-year-old by the name of Bobby Franks in a very meticulously planned crime. And the case garnered media attention due to its shocking nature of the crime and the backgrounds of the perpetrators. After all, these guys had everything going for them. Now, what made the Leopold and Loeb case particularly significant in the context of forensic psychology was the role of expert testimony in the trial. Now, the defense attorney, Clarence Darrow, employed the services of a very prominent psychologist and psychoanalyst by the name of Dr. William Healy to assess the mental states of Leopold and Loeb and to provide some expert testimony on their behalf. And Dr. Healy's evaluation really focused on understanding the psychological factors that may have influenced the defendant's behavior, including their privileged upbringing, their intellectual arrogance, and the dynamics of their relationship. And he argued that Leopold and Loeb's actions were not solely driven by malicious intent, but were also influenced by psychological factors such as impulsivity, thrill-seeking, and a distorted sense of morality. And Darrow and Healy strategically presented the case as a demonstration of the flawed nature of the criminal justice system. They basically turned everything on its head and advocated for a more rehabilitative approach to punishment. And so, because they argued that Leopold and Loeb's youth, along with their psychological vulnerabilities, warranted some leniency and rehabilitation rather than harsh punishment. Now, Leopold and Loeb were sentenced to life in prison rather than facing the death penalty, so in a way, it worked. And this was a decision that was in part came about by the compelling psychological testimony presented by Dr. Healy. But the case highlights the growing recognition of the importance of psychological expertise in understanding criminal behavior and informing legal proceedings. Now, throughout that's the 1920s, we get to the 1930s, and then in that time we have so before and after this Leopold and Loeb, we have that very tumultuous time of World War I and World War II. And these also had some profound implications for the field of psychology. A lot was learned from the battlefield, from doing assessments, from doing interventions, from understanding human behavior under extreme conditions. So, for example, in World War I, psychologists were mobilized to assist in the selection and classification of military personnel. And this led to the development of psychological tests for assessing intelligence and personality traits and aptitudes. And this marked a significant milestone in the application of psychological assessment tools and laid the groundwork for their subsequent use in forensic context, because the military learned very quickly that there are some people that are more of a detriment than a help. Not everybody is useful, and so it's important to weed out those that do not have the intellectual capacity to work with others and to fulfill tasks. Now, moreover, the wartime experiences of soldiers and civilians provided some really valuable insights into psychological effects of trauma. Shell shock became a thing that was known at the time, and stress and combat exposure. And so we have psychologists like William McDougall and Louis Terman. They conducted some pioneering research on the psychological consequences of war and really highlighted the importance of understanding and addressing mental health needs of individuals affected by conflict. Then we have World War II that further propelled the integration of the psychology into military settings, with psychologists playing key roles in areas such as selection and training and morale assessment. And the war also fostered advancements in studies like group dynamics, leadership, propaganda, areas that would later become implications for forensic psychology, particularly in understanding the psychology of criminal behavior and influence tactics. Then we have the aftermath. Oh, another thing to be highlighted here, something that is fairly interesting, just how harsh war is on soldiers. At the height of World War II, when they were drafting people as fast as they could and bringing people in as fast as they could from America, they were losing just as many people solely on psychiatric grounds. Their minds were giving out faster than they could recruit them. Which goes to show, and this isn't being shocked or injured in any other way other than their mind going out. So that just shows how horrible war is on the mind. Afterwards, after World War II, we had the Nuremberg trials, where psychologists contributed to the assessment of defendants' mental states and the investigation of war crimes. And this marked a significant moment in that whole intersection of psychology and international law, and really highlighted the potential for psychological expertise to inform legal proceedings and contribute to accountability, but also justice. Now, firstly, there was the utilization of psychological assessment tools during wartime, and that paved the way for their adaptation and application to forensic contexts. And secondly, the wartime research on the psychological effects of trauma and stress and combat exposure contributed to the deeper understanding of human behavior under these extreme conditions. And so that gave insight into domestic violence, into forensic settings, into assessing mental states and capacities, and involving legal proceedings, including understanding victims and witnesses and defendants. So there's a lot that went on here. Also with the wartime, there was the highlighting the interdependence between psychology and legal profession and government and military authorities in decision-making processes. It's important, in essence, to always have a psychology expert on hand when you're dealing with people in whatever field, because you can't truly deal with the needs of people or understand people accurately unless you do. Now, I want to take a look at another landmark case in forensic psychology within history, within America. This is the Brown versus Board of Education. And I've had some students that have really highlighted how this has hit home for them, that they've had similar experiences. So I want to share this with you. This happened in Topeka, Kansas in 1954. And the case was heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. It challenged the constitutionality of racial segregation in public schools. And it marked a significant turning point in the fight for civil rights in the United States. Brown versus Board of Education is primarily remembered for its impact on education and civil rights law. It also had profound implications for forensic psychology, and highlights the role here, I think, of psychological research and expertise in informing not only legal decisions, but public policy as well. Now, really central to the Brown versus Board of Education case was the question of whether racial segregation in schools had a detrimental effect on the psychological well-being and development of African American children. And psychologists like Kenneth B. Clark played a crucial role in providing empirical evidence to support the plaintiff's argument that segregation resulted in feelings of inferiority and had a damaging effect on the self-esteem and academic achievement of African American students. And what he did was something called the doll studies, where Clark presented African American children with dolls of different races and asked them to express their preferences. And the findings, which revealed a preference for white dolls and a negative association with dolls of their own race. And this provided compelling evidence of the psychological harm caused by racial segregation. And so there was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court justices, and they cited Clark's research and other psychological evidence in their ruling that racial segregation in the public schools was unconstitutional. And the court recognized the psychological harm inflicted by segregation and affirmed the importance of equal education opportunities for all children, regardless of race. So, the Brown versus Board of Education case exemplifies the critical role that forensic psychology plays in advocating for social justice and influencing legal outcomes. And it really underscores, I think, the significance of empirical research and psychological expertise in addressing these complex social issues and challenging the discriminatory practices within the legal system. Another groundbreaking case from history. Miranda versus Arizona, 1966. This one you've seen 1,000 times on TV shows and you didn't realize it. Because in this landmark case, heard by the Supreme Court, it addresses the fundamental issue of the protection of individual rights during police investigations and interrogations. And at the heart of the Miranda case was the question of the admissibility of statements made by individuals during custodial interrogations without being informed of their constitutional rights. The case revolved around the confession of Ernesto Miranda, who was arrested and interrogated by police without being informed of his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination or his Sixth Amendment right to legal counsel. And the Supreme Court's decision in Miranda versus Arizona established the now infamous or famous Miranda rights, which require that individuals be informed of the rights to remain silent and to have an attorney present during police interrogations. And the court held that failure to inform individuals of these rights renders any subsequent statements obtained during custodial interrogation inadmissible as evidence in court. And the Miranda decision had some really far-reaching implications for forensic psychology, particularly in the realm of interrogation and confessions. Psychologists became increasingly involved in understanding the psychological dynamics of police interrogations, including the factors that influence suspects' decision-making, compliance, and susceptibility to coercion. Now, research really conducted in the wake of the Miranda decision has really kind of shed light on factors like suggestibility and compliance and false confessions, which have shaped our understanding of the vulnerabilities inherent in custodial interrogations. So, the Miranda case underscores the importance of procedural safeguards in protecting individuals' rights and ensuring fairness of legal proceedings. And so psychology here was essential. Now, I want to also talk a little bit about, and I did mention this last week, a little bit of some of the historical psychological assessments that are used in forensic psychology, because I think it's important that we become familiar with these. These will not be central to this course, but I do want you to be aware that they are out there. Over time, there's been a demand for assessment tools designed specifically for forensics purposes. And this has grown to some very significant tools. I mentioned the MMPI. The MMPI is a very broad one, but there's others. So, for example, in the area of risk assessment tools are designed really to assess what is the risk of future violence or criminal behavior. So there's something called the Hare Psychopathy Checklist, and another tool called the Violence Risk Appraisal Guide, which are used in forensic settings to inform decisions related to sentencing or parole and risk management. There's also certain tools designed to help a psychologist make determinations in competency hearings. So, for example, these will evaluate an individual's competency to stand trial, their ability to make legal decisions or waive their rights, such as with the MacArthur Competence Assessment Tool for criminal adjudication, which I have a picture of there on the slide. This helps to ensure the individuals are able to meaningfully participate in legal proceedings. And of course, there are other tools like mental health evaluation tools, things that are psychological tests or measures that are utilized to assess an individual's mental health status, diagnose them with psychiatric disorders. There's tools such as the structured clinical interview for the DSM disorders, or the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. You can see the version 2 there on the slide that I mentioned. And there's also forensic assessments on children or families, and these are really specialized instruments that are available for assessing children's competency to testify or evaluating a parental fitness in custody disputes, and assessing the impact of family dynamics on child welfare, such as the child behavior checklist and the parenting stress index. And the development of these assessment tools has been guided by rigorous research and validation efforts aimed at ensuring their reliability and validity and utility in forensic contexts. And psychologists working in collaboration with legal professionals have played a really pivotal role, I think, in refining and adapting these instruments. So just remember that there's always a moving target here. We're always improving these things, so it's important to have them at the highest, the most recent version. And that it be normed on the population that you're actually dealing with as well. That's a legal requirement. Now, another thing, I want to kind of come back to the MMPI because it does so many things, but it has a really interesting part to it. It has one particular scale that's really good for forensic settings. It's called the Psychopathic Deviance Scale. And this scale helps assess traits such as social deviance, lack of conformity, and disregard for societal norms, which are often relevant in criminal and legal evaluations. Now, what this does is it helps to assess criminal responsibility, because the Psychopathic Deviance Scale can provide insights into whether an individual has a personality structure that is more prone to antisocial behavior, which might inform evaluations related to criminal responsibility or to diminished capacity. It also can help assess things like risk assessment. The Psychopathic Deviance Scale can be used to assess likely future offending or recidivism, particularly with a person that has a history of antisocial behavior. And also to assess things like the defendant's personality structure when it comes to their ability to comprehend the charges against them, which would be obviously relevant in something like competency hearings. Now, here's just a couple of sample kind of things that now I don't want to go reveal too much because these are law protected, but I want to kind of give you a little bit of a sense of the kinds of questions that you might see in a scale like this. One of them might be something like, I enjoy getting into physical fights. That might be the question. And what this question does is it taps into what are the tendencies towards aggressiveness and confrontational behavior. Or there might be a question like, I often feel that laws and rules don't apply to me. And this question assesses a disregard for societal norms and rules, which is a key aspect of psychopathic traits. Or it might be, I have done things that were risky or reckless without considering the consequences. And this reflects impulsivity and a lack of consideration for the impact of one's actions, both of which are really common in psychopathic behavior. Or I've lied to get what I want, which comes to the question of assessing manipulativeness, another trait associated with psychopathy. Or I feel no guilt after hurting someone, and this captures the lack of empathy and remorse that is central to psychopathic behavior. So you can see there that there are a lot of questions, and they might seem really simple and straightforward, but there's a meaning behind them that goes into a scoring system that helps give you a picture of a personality structure, a way of thinking that is inherent within the person. Now, forensic psychology also is interested in the insanity defense. And this is probably one of the most enduring and contentious issues in the field of forensic psychology. It's really rooted in the principle that individuals should not be held criminally responsible for their actions if they were mentally incapable of understanding the nature or consequences of their behavior at the time of the offense. And the insanity defense has a long and complex history shaped by legal precedents, societal attitudes, and scientific advancements. And the origins of the insanity defense can be traced back even to ancient civilizations, where there was a concept that mental illness and responsibility were intertwined with religious and moral beliefs. But it wasn't until the 19th century that the modern legal framework for insanity defense became a thing that started to really take shape. And this has been influenced by the emerging fields of psychology and psychiatry, when we have finally started to be able to understand mental illness a little better. And one of the earliest and most influential cases shaping the insanity defense in the United States was the trial of Daniel McNaughton in 1843. Now, McNaughton, who believed that he was being persecuted by the British government, assassinated the secretary of the British Prime Minister. And his acquittal, by reason of insanity, prompted some widespread debate and led to the establishment of what is called the McNaughton Rule, which remains a foundational standard for insanity defense in many jurisdictions today. Now, throughout the 20th century, the insanity defense continues to be evolving. And so in the United States in 1954, we have something called the Durham Rule, which introduced a broader definition of insanity, emphasizing the connection between mental illness and criminal behavior. Now, there are some concerns about its subjectivity and potential for abuse, which led to its eventual abandonment in favor of the more restrictive McNaughton Rule, or the Model Penal Code standard in many jurisdictions. And the model penal code principle is a really kind of a comprehensive statutory framework that has been developed by the American Law Institute in the 1950s as an attempt to standardize and modernize criminal law across the United States. And now, while the model penal code itself is not law, it's really kind of served as a model for a lot of state legislatures in reforming and updating their criminal codes. And in terms of the insanity defense, the model penal code introduces a new standard for determining legal insanity. So it departs a little bit from the traditional McNaughton rule and the broader Durham rule. And it really kind of looks at cognitive incapacity, where the defendant lacked substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality or the wrongfulness of his or her actions at the time of the offense. And this criterion is similar to the cognitive prong of the McNaughton rule and focusing really on the defendant's understanding of the nature and consequences of their actions. Now, there's another side to this, though, and that is, so that's the cognitive incapacity, but then there's also volitional incapacity, because alternatively, the defendant lacked substantial capacity to conform their conduct to the requirements of the law due to a mental disease or defect. And so this criteria introduces a volitional element, focusing on the defendant's ability to control his or her behavior in accordance with the law. And so the model penal code's formulation of the insanity defense incorporates both the cognitive element and the volitional element. And so it's a little more nuanced in understanding mental illness and criminal responsibility. So by considering not only whether the defendant understood the wrongfulness of their actions, but also whether they were able to control their behavior due to their mental impairment, the model penal code seeks really to provide a fairly comprehensive and fairly balanced approach to evaluating insanity claims. So I hope you see there that insanity defense has been subject to some pretty intense scrutiny and controversy, with debates focusing on issues such as the definition of insanity, the burden of proof, the perceived leniency or harshness of verdicts rendered under their defense. And there's been some pretty high-profile cases, like, for example, John Hinckley Jr., when he attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. That has brought up some controversy as far as what's in the public interest and debate around that. And then there's the role of expert witness and expert testimony within forensic psychology, and that has developed over time as well. And there are different parts to that. There's the part that we think of in terms of psychological evaluations, where the expert witness will conduct a comprehensive psychological evaluation of individuals that are in legal proceedings. And this might be defendants, but it also might be victims, it might be witnesses, and it assesses various factors such as mental health and cognitive functioning and personality traits and psychological symptoms relevant to the case. Expert witness or expert testimony might come in the form of opinion testimony. So based on their evaluation and expertise, an expert witness can provide opinion testimony on matters within their area of specialization. So this might be their opinion of how psychologically trauma might impact someone, or how it might impact their decision making or their memory or their testimony. Expert witnesses can also be called in to simply educate the court, and This is a critical role. They can educate judges and juries about complex psychological concepts, research findings, diagnostic criteria relevant to the case. And this may clarify some misconceptions, explain psychological principles, and translate technical terminology into layperson language to aid in decision making. So there's a lot of different ways in which expert testimony and expert witness can be played out as well. Now, of course, something you may have seen on TV shows is how there's that intersection between forensic psychology and law enforcement, and really how that they can collaborate together to understand and address criminal behavior. So, like, for example, the TV series Mindhunters, or the series Criminal Minds, looks at investigative techniques and behavioral analysis techniques, and how we can develop offender profiles based upon crime scene evidence and victim characteristics and other relevant factors in order to analyze patterns of behavior and psychological traits and hopefully find the perpetrator. There's also psychology in investigative interviews and interrogation, developing effective interviewing and interrogation techniques using psychology and in order to communicate with a person better, to detect deception better, to build rapport with the person better, to better not influence a witness. There's also assessments around risk assessment and threat analysis. And we've talked a little bit about that already. Basically looking at, is this person at risk of reoffending? And so, for example, should they be eligible for parole? Should there be pretrial detention? Should there be release conditions? All of this would be informed by forensic psychology as well. And then, of course, there's training and professional development in the field, where forensic psychologists can go in and train law enforcement and go in and train people in criminal justice, how to deal with things like crisis intervention, mental health awareness, trauma-informed policing, cultural competence. All of these can be very important as well. And it can also play into child custody and family law, and that is another important area. One of the primary functions of forensic psychologists actually is child custody cases, because it's so common. And in these cases, you'd be looking at things like, what's the parenting capacity of the potential parents? And this might consider factors such as what are their caregiving skills? What is their emotional stability? What are their communication abilities and their willingness to facilitate the relationship with other parents? There's also child interviews and observations. So a forensic psychologist might conduct interviews and observations with the children to assess their preference, their attachments, their developmental needs, and their adjustment to family situations. So there's a lot of different areas there as well. And of course, we cannot forget victimology. This in itself is its own specific career path. Victimology is really a subfield of forensic psychology that focuses on the study of victims of crime and their experiences, their needs, and the impact of victimization on individuals and communities. So forensic psychologists play a crucial role in understanding and addressing the needs of victims, as well as advocating for policies and services that support their recovery and promote justice. So it's about understanding victimization, it's about understanding trauma-informed care, it's about developing skills for victim advocacy, it's about helping to prepare for victim impact statements within court, it's about restorative justice programs, and it is about prevention and intervention. So there's a lot that goes on within forensic psychology. Hope you enjoyed that. So I just want to kind of reiterate a few things. Just a bit of a reminder, at the end of most of my lectures will be some key terms and a question. These key terms and a question will almost always factor into a question in the quizzes. So it's important to pay special attention to the question at the end of the lecture. So there are some key terms. Our key terms for this week are insanity defense. What is that? It is a legal defense in which a defendant argues that they should not be held criminally responsible for their actions due to mental illness or a defect at the time of the offense. The defendant must demonstrate that they were unable to appreciate the nature or wrongfulness of their actions, or were unable to conform their behavior to the requirements of the law. That's the insanity defense. Then there is the expert testimony, and testimony provided by individuals with specialized knowledge, training, or expertise in a particular field relevant to the legal case. Expert witnesses may offer opinions, they may offer interpretations or conclusions based on their expertise to assist the court in understanding some complex issues or evaluating evidence. And then there's the victim impact statement. And this is a statement prepared by a crime victim or their representative describing the physical, emotional, and financial impact of the crime on the victim and their loved ones. Victim impact statements are presented to the court during sentencing hearings to inform judges of the harm caused by the crime and to advocate for appropriate punishment. So, when we come to the question, what is the best definition of the insanity defense? I would argue that it is this: a legal defense asserting that the defendant should not be held criminally responsible due to mental illness or defect at the time of the offense. So, reflecting back on what we've learned about forensic psychology and the history of it, hope that you can see that it has a significant impact upon our daily life, our outlook and understanding of what justice is in society, and hopefully will continue to shape that for the better into the future. And hopefully you can be a part of that transformation of our society to a more caring and more just society. You take care. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.